Imagine a world without books. No bound pages, no printed volumes, no glowing e-readers, no libraries filled with paper and ink. Just memory, voice, and the will to remember. Before the first written symbols appeared, there was the human voice. Long before alphabets and even before formal writing systems, people remembered. Elders, poets, and storytellers served as living libraries. Every tale, every genealogy, every law was carried not on parchment, but within the mind. Oral tradition wasn't simply storytelling for entertainment. It was a living system of knowledge transmission, one that could preserve entire histories with astonishing precision. In some societies, memory keepers were trained from childhood. They memorized thousands of lines, myths, histories, laws, and rituals, all encoded in rhythm, rhyme, or song to make them easier to recall. Among the Aboriginal Australians, for example, songlines were not just songs, they were maps of the land. Each verse traced a path through rivers, mountains, and sacred sites. Singing a route meant retracing ancestral footsteps across geography and time. The song was both compass and chronicle. In West Africa, griots, the oral historians, performed a similar role. For centuries, they have preserved genealogies, wars, and wisdom through story and rhythm. A griot could recount the lineage of kings going back hundreds of years, connecting the living with their ancestors through the spoken word. In ancient Greece, before Homer's works were written down, the Iliad and Odyssey were oral epics memorized and recited by generations of poets known as rhapsodes. These weren't loose performances, they followed strict poetic meters that helped preserve the text almost word for word. Oral tradition worked because it engaged the whole community. Storytelling wasn't passive, it was participatory. People learned by hearing, repeating, and retelling. In a sense, society itself became the archive. And this system wasn't primitive, it was adaptive, resilient, and alive. When writing materials decayed, when fires destroyed cities, the stories survived because they lived in people. So before the world had libraries of paper, it had libraries of memory. Over time, human societies expanded. Trade networks grew, populations increased, and administration became complex. Memory alone could no longer keep track of everything. So came the invention of writing, one of the greatest turning points in human history. Around 3200 BCE in Mesopotamia, scribes began pressing wedge-shaped marks into wet clay using reeds. These marks, called cuneiform, represented words, numbers, and sounds. Once dried or baked, these tablets became the first durable written records. These tablets recorded everything from business transactions to poetry. They were heavy, fragile, and definitely not portable, but they lasted. Some have survived for more than 4,000 years, making them among the oldest documents humanity possesses. In Egypt, writing took a different form. The hieroglyphic system combined pictorial and phonetic symbols carved on tombs, temple walls, and monuments. Here, writing was both a communication tool and an act of devotion. To carve words in stone was to make them eternal, a message for gods and generations alike. Elsewhere in the Indus Valley, early inscriptions appeared on seals and pottery, their meaning still mysterious to us today. In China, oracle bones, turtle shells, and ox bones were inscribed with questions to the gods, recording rituals and decisions of early dynasties. What unites all these early scripts is a shared goal: the desire to preserve information beyond the limits of the human lifespan. And here lies a profound truth: the medium mattered. When you carve into stone or bake into clay, you trade portability for permanence. These early societies understood that trade-off and chose endurance over convenience. Each piece of writing was not just a message, it was a monument. Writing wasn't the only way ancient people preserved history. Entire buildings, temples, and monuments were constructed to remember, to embody knowledge in stone. Think of the pyramids of Egypt. Beyond their function as tombs, they encoded religious and cosmological meanings. Alignments with stars, symbolic proportions, and sacred geometry. Their very placement reflected beliefs about the afterlife and cosmic order. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats rose from the plains like stairways to heaven, architectural texts written in mud brick, expressing both political power and spiritual aspiration. In Mesoamerica, the Maya built temples and pyramids precisely aligned with the solstices and equinoxes. These alignments served as astronomical calendars, ensuring that agricultural and ritual events stayed synchronized with the heavens. Even in prehistoric Europe, Stonehenge and other megalithic sites acted as memory devices. They weren't just ceremonial, they encoded the rhythm of the seasons, marking time through the position of the sun. In all these examples, architecture became a three-dimensional book, a public collective memory system. Each generation could look at the stones, walk through the spaces, and understand something about their origins, their gods, and their place in the universe. While stone and clay endured, they were cumbersome. As trade and administration became more complex, people needed lighter, more flexible ways to write. In Egypt, the papyrus plant offered a revolutionary solution. Cut into thin strips, pressed and dried, it formed sheets that could be rolled into scrolls. Papyrus made writing mobile. It allowed scribes to carry knowledge. This innovation spread across the Mediterranean. Greek and Roman scholars wrote letters, literature, and science on papyrus rolls. Yet papyrus had its weakness: it decayed easily, especially in humid climates. Many ancient works survived only because Egypt's dry deserts preserved them. In India and Southeast Asia, scholars wrote on palm leaves cut, dried, and inscribed with styluses. To protect them from insects and humidity, they were often treated with oils and stored carefully in temples and monasteries. In China, early writers used bamboo slips and silk before the invention of paper around the 2nd century BCE. Once paper emerged, it transformed East Asia. It was cheap, light, and flexible, perfect for mass copying and education. In the Greco-Roman world, wax tablets were used for temporary notes and reusable writing. Messages could be written, erased, and rewritten, the ancient equivalent of a whiteboard. These materials, papyrus, palm leaf, bamboo, silk, made writing more personal, more dynamic. Yet they also required constant care. They were fragile, transient, and demanded active preservation. It reminds us that every piece of written history we still possess is a survivor, a lucky fragment that escaped time's decay. In these systems, the material object is not necessarily a book, but it is designed to remind, trigger, or represent narrative. The community knows the code, the pattern, the symbol, the sequence. And importantly, these are usually community artifacts, meant not just for individual reading, but for group memory, initiation, and ritual. They embed knowledge into tangible culture. One more example. Song cycles in Australian Aboriginal cultures embed geography, waterholes, journeys, and seasonal information into the melody. The sung root becomes archive. So preservation of history isn't always about writing it down neatly, but about embedding it into material culture, ritual, performance, and memory. As civilizations matured, the role of institutions in preservation became central. Scribes, libraries, temples, monasteries became guardians of knowledge. In Mesopotamia, for example, the archives of cities like Nineveh collected tens of thousands of clay tablets. One fire incident baked the tablets, ironically helping preserve them for millennia. Temples in India preserved manuscripts on palm leaves and birch bark, and Buddhist monasteries did similar in East Asia. Furthermore, the act of copying texts by hand was itself a preservation mechanism. Because no single copy can last forever, communities relied on successive regeneration of the text. As one scholar in Reddit put it, if a text is considered important, then it would be copied. This process will preserve it through the ages more than an actual method of conservation. Thus, institutional memory, human labor, culture of repetition, and transcription all contributed to preservation long before the printing press or mass-produced books. Yet this system had vulnerabilities. Materials decay, climate affects survival, war or neglect destroy archives. This leads us to reflect. Preservation is not passive, it requires human attention, resources, and a culture that values memory. Not all knowledge was written. Many ancient societies used objects, patterns, and symbols to encode meaning in nonverbal ways. In the Andes, long before Spanish conquest, the Inca used a system called quipu, knotted strings that stored numerical and narrative information. Each color, length, and knot type represented data, census records, harvest quantities, even historical events. The quipu was a tactile archive, one that could be read by trained keepers. Among the indigenous peoples of the Pacific Northwest, totem poles served as genealogical records, recounting clan stories, spiritual lineages, and social codes. Each carved figure was a chapter in the story of a people. In West Africa, symbolic textiles such as kente cloth carried meaning through patterns and color. Each design represented ideas, unity, wisdom, courage, or history. Wearing such textiles was both art and communication. Even music served as record-keeping. Among the Aboriginal Australians, the rhythm of songlines could describe routes and landmarks so precisely that they formed navigational maps. In this sense, the melody itself was geography, a sung map of the earth. These systems blurred the line between art and archive. They remind us that writing isn't always alphabetic. A woven pattern, a carved pole, a chanted song, each could hold information accessible to those who understood the code. As civilizations advanced, knowledge preservation became institutional. Scribes, priests, monks, and scholars assumed the role once held by storytellers. But now, their libraries were filled not with memory alone, but with material records. In Mesopotamia, the city of Nineveh housed the library of Ashurbanipal, one of the world's first great archives. Tens of thousands of clay tablets were collected there. Ironically, when the city burned, the intense heat baked the tablets, preserving them for over 2,500 years. In Egypt, temple scribes maintained massive archives of religious and legal texts. In India, Brahmin priests and Buddhist monks copied sacred verses on palm leaves, storing them in monasteries. In China, imperial archives recorded dynastic histories and bureaucratic documents, often recopied through the centuries. In medieval Europe, monks became the caretakers of written memory. Within monastery scriptoria, they painstakingly copied ancient texts by hand, line by line, page by page. Through wars, invasions, and plagues, these institutions protected knowledge that might otherwise have vanished. This copying was more than preservation. It was resurrection. When one manuscript decayed, a new one replaced it. When empires fell, libraries rebuilt. Through human devotion, knowledge leaped across generations. As one historian said, a text survives not because it was never lost, but because it was loved enough to be rewritten. But even with writing and institutions, loss was constant. Papyrus crumbled. Palm leaves turned to dust. Fires devoured libraries, floods erased archives. The Library of Alexandria, perhaps the most famous of all, was destroyed in a series of calamities: war, neglect, and time. Entire civilizations' worth of knowledge vanished with it. This teaches us something profound. Preservation is not passive. It requires attention, effort, and care. Memory, whether oral or written, survives only when someone chooses to protect it. And yet, humanity's resilience shines through. We recopy, we rebuild, we retell. The same spirit that kept the griots singing in Africa and the monks copying in Europe continues today in digital archives, museums, and even your smartphone's memory. When we talk about a world without books, we don't mean a world without writing. We mean a world without the modern form of the book-bound pages, printed type, personal ownership. But history shows us that knowledge doesn't need a cover to be a book. Clay tablets, stone carvings, papyrus scrolls, songlines, quipus, totem poles, all fulfilled the same purpose: to preserve, transmit, and legitimize knowledge. In every age, humans found a way to externalize memory. We carved it into matter, encoded it in melody, wove it into fabric, and passed it through generations. And in each case, what mattered most wasn't the medium, but the commitment to remember. So let's step back and look at the long arc of human history. It began with a voice, the storyteller by the fire. Then came the stylus pressed into clay, the chisel against stone, the ink on papyrus, the stylus on palm leaf. Then the monks in candlelight, the scholars of Alexandria, the scribes of Nineveh, the weavers of the Andes, the singers of the Dreamtime. And finally us. Every form of preservation we use today, from printed books to digital storage, is an echo of these ancient methods. Your ebook reader is not a break from tradition, it's its continuation. Because at the heart of it all is one truth: to remember is to be human. So the next time you hold a book in your hands or scroll through an online article, take a moment to imagine the countless hands, voices, and minds that came before you. The griots who sang the histories, the scribes who pressed clay into permanence, the monks who copied words in candlelight, the architects who aligned their temples to the stars, the mothers who told stories to children by firelight so that names would not be forgotten. In a world without books, they made sure the story continued. They remind us that preservation is not just a technical act, it's an act of love, a promise to the future, a defiance against forgetting. And so, from the echo of an ancient song to the click of your keyboard today, The story of humanity endures. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this exploration, please like, subscribe, and join us again as we uncover more ways humanity has kept its story alive through time.